Before the fire came, the world was quiet. It was the year 1739, in the low country of South Carolina, a land heavy with heat, silence, and the unspoken weight of labor. The rice plantations stretched endlessly along the Stono River, their waters glinting like glass beneath the morning sun, their fields whispering in the wind like the breathing of ghosts. Men and women toiled there from dawn until dusk, their hands rough from the grain, their songs carried on the humid air, songs of sorrow, faith, and faint rebellion. Among them was one man, Jemmy. He was no ordinary enslaved man. Born not in America, but on the western coast of Africa, he carried with him the rhythm of a different world, a world that once called him free. Those who knew him spoke of his sharp mind, his ability to speak not only his native tongue, but English and a few words of Portuguese, a language he'd picked up from the traders who'd stolen him from his home. On the surface, Jemmy seemed calm, obedient, reserved, eyes always low when the overseer passed. But within, there burned a quiet calculation. Each day he watched, listened, and waited. In 1739, South Carolina was a colony built on fear. The enslaved outnumbered their masters 2-1. The white landowners lived in a constant state of unease, terrified that one day the people they'd chained might rise. And Jemmy knew it. He had seen the patterns, the overseers drinking themselves into stupors on Sundays, the guards lazy and unarmed in the early morning hours. He had also heard whispers, rumors that the Spanish in Florida offered freedom to any enslaved person who could make the perilous journey south and pledge loyalty to the Spanish crown. Freedom, a word that had become more myth than memory. But to Jemmy, it was a destination, a direction on the map, just beyond the reach of fear. The plan formed slowly, like smoke curling through the dark. He would gather men he could trust, men who remembered who they once were, men who had not yet forgotten how to fight. And on a Sunday morning, when the planters would be away at church, he would strike. The night before it began, the moon hung pale and distant. A small group of men met near the banks of the Stono River, their shadows flickering in the dim light of torches. They spoke in low voices, English mixed with fragments of Kikongo, their words carried by the wind, disappearing into the reeds. Jemmy stood at the center of them. In his hands, he held a drum, the same drum he'd once used in the fields to pass time, now became a signal of defiance, a heartbeat of rebellion. He did not shout, he did not boast. He simply told them what needed to be done. By sunrise, they would march south toward Florida, toward freedom, and for the first time in their lives, they would choose the path for themselves. Historians would later write about this moment, calling it the Stono Rebellion, the largest slave uprising in the American colonies before the Revolution. But in that moment, it was not history. It was survival. It was men reclaiming their voices in a world that had silenced them. As dawn began to rise, the men moved through the fog-covered road, their faces determined, their hearts steady. They found a small storehouse not far from the river, its door unbarred, its windows still dark. Inside were weapons, tools meant for the protection of the colony, now turned toward a new purpose. When the first shouts echoed across the fields, the Stono Rebellion had begun. Word would spread fast. Before the sun reached its highest point, the colony would be gripped in chaos. But that first hour, that first breath of freedom, was unlike any other. Jemmy and his men carried banners, some inscribed with the word liberty. They marched south along the road, drums beating in rhythm with their footsteps. Each strike of the drum was both a warning and a promise, a sound that told the world, we are no longer silent. Some say that Jemmy's eyes gleamed as he walked, not with hatred, but with resolve. He knew what this act meant. He knew the price. And still, he marched. Behind him, the road stretched like a scar through the land. Ahead, the unknown waited. But for the first time in a long time, Jemmy was walking toward something, not away. History remembers battles in numbers, in victories and losses. But this was something deeper. This was a whisper turned into a roar. A man who refused to die quietly. As the smoke began to rise over the horizon, the colonies would soon awaken to what they feared most, the sound of freedom echoing through their fields. At the edge of the Stono River, on a quiet September morning in 1739, a man named Jemmy lit a fire that would never truly go out. The sun had just begun to rise over the low country. The mist was lifting, curling like pale smoke over the riverbanks. And on that dirt road between the plantations, Jemmy and his men began to move. There were around 20 of them at first, men from different fields, different tribes, but bound together by one thing, the need to be free. They marched in a line, weapons raised, heads high, their eyes locked on the horizon to the south. The world they left behind, the world that had chained them, was burning quietly behind their backs. In the colonies, Sundays were meant for worship and rest, but on that day, it became the sound of drums and shouts. The rebels' message was simple, yet terrifying to those who heard it. They were headed for Spanish Florida, and freedom would be claimed, not granted. As they marched, they stopped at houses along the way. Some people fled, others tried to resist, but the Stono rebels did not hesitate. They took what they needed, food, weapons, horses, and they left behind a symbol, a warning that the age of silence was over. For the first few miles, no one dared stop them. Most plantations were spread far apart, and the planters, caught off guard on a Sunday morning, had no time to organize a defense. It was not chaos to Jemmy. It was a march, disciplined, focused. He kept the men together, ensuring that no one broke away or lost control. The road wound through pine and cypress forests, the air thick with humidity. Each step took them further from the fields they had once known, closer to the hope of freedom they could almost taste. They sang as they walked, not songs of sorrow this time, but something older, a rhythm from across the ocean, a song that had once filled the villages of Angola and the Congo. It was not a battle cry. It was a reminder of who they were, of what had been taken, of what they were now reclaiming. By mid-morning, word of the uprising had reached nearby towns. Riders were sent out to alert the colonial militia, and soon, drums of a different kind began to beat, the drums of alarm. Governor William Bull himself narrowly escaped capture when he rode past the road and spotted the rebels approaching. He spurred his horse and fled to Charleston, gathering armed men as he went. The chase had begun. By noon, Jemmy's group had grown. More men had joined them from nearby plantations, some willingly, others driven by the spark of hope. The road southward now held close to 60 men, marching together under the word liberty. But freedom is a flame that burns quickly when the wind turns. The militia was on their trail, dozens of armed colonists moving fast through the countryside, closing in on the same road the rebels walked. When Jemmy and his men reached the Edisto River, they stopped to rest, tired, hungry, and uncertain how far the Spanish border truly was. Some men wanted to keep marching, others wanted to hide. Jemmy stood between them, looking across the water as if it held the answer. He knew they were running out of time. This was the moment when courage met reality. The dream of freedom, so close in the morning light, now faced the full force of an empire built to prevent it. The men were brave, but the world around them was vast, and the people chasing them were determined. As the sun began to set, they heard it, the thunder of hooves approaching through the trees. The militia fell upon them near a small clearing beside the river. There were gunshots, shouts, confusion. The sound of battle echoed through the woods, brief, violent, and echoing across the fields. When the smoke cleared, the Stono Rebellion was broken. Many of Jemmy's men fell where they stood. Others scattered, vanishing into the swamps. A few were captured alive. And Jemmy, he disappeared into history. No one knows if he was killed that day or if he managed to escape into the marshes, fading into legend like a ghost carried on the Carolina wind. But though the rebellion ended on that road, its echoes did not fade. It rippled through the colonies like a warning bell. Planters grew more fearful than ever, and new laws were written, harsher, crueler, designed to control, to silence, to make sure no one else dared to do what Jenny had done. Yet what they feared most could not be chained. The idea that men and women could stand, even for a moment, against impossible odds, that they could shout liberty in a land built on their silence, that was something no law could kill. Jemmy's march did not end at Stono. It carried on in whispers, in stories passed quietly between enslaved people across the South, in dreams that crossed rivers, mountains, and centuries. Each time someone dared to imagine freedom, that same drumbeat returned. History would record the Stono Rebellion as a failed uprising, but failure is only one way to see it. In truth, it was a beginning, a signal that the human spirit cannot be contained forever, a spark that would, in time, ignite much greater fires. The road to freedom was long, but on that September morning, it began with footsteps, drums, and a man named Jemmy. When the drums of Stono went silent, the world did not return to peace. It returned to fear. The rebellion had been crushed, but the air over South Carolina hung heavy with dread. Smoke still curled over the plantations, and for days afterward, riders scoured the countryside, searching for anyone who might have escaped. They found some men who had hidden in swamps or forests, starving, wounded, yet still unwilling to surrender. Colonial records tell us that many were captured and punished. Others vanished completely, their names lost to history. But one name remained, Jemmy. He had become a symbol, a ghost haunting the edges of the American dream. In Charleston, the governor wrote reports to London, describing the rebellion in measured words, trying to assure the crown that the colony was under control. But beneath those words, you can sense the unease, a quiet admission that something fundamental had shifted. If men could rise once, they could rise again. And so the colony answered not with understanding, but with new chains. The Negro Act of 1740 was passed soon after. It restricted movement, forbade the teaching of reading and writing, and gave owners near total control over the lives they claimed to own. It was, in many ways, a wall built out of fear, a desperate attempt to hold back the tide of humanity. But fear cannot erase memory, and memory cannot be enslaved. Decades would pass. Wars would come and go. New generations would be born on that same soil. But somewhere deep in the heart of the Carolinas, the story of Jemmy would continue, passed in whispers from one to another. They would say, "There was once a man who refused to bow. There was once a man who led others toward freedom. There was once a man who dared to dream beyond the river." No one knows what truly became of Jemmy. Some say he was captured and killed. Others believe he made it south, across the marshes and through the forests, to Spanish Florida, and that he lived his final years as a free man under a different name. History offers no proof, but legends rarely need it. What remains are fragments, letters, laws, accounts written by men who feared the very story they were recording. Yet even in their words, Jemmy's shadow lingers. A reminder that courage can be found in the unlikeliest corners of history. He did not have an army. He did not have a country. He had only a belief that freedom was not something given, but something taken by those brave enough to reach for it. The Stono Rebellion was small in numbers, but vast in meaning. It showed that the human spirit, even when buried beneath oppression, cannot be extinguished. Every step those men took toward the South was a declaration. Every breath they drew in defiance was a hymn of survival. And though they did not reach freedom, they reached something almost as powerful. They reached history. Centuries later, their legacy would echo through revolts in Virginia, in Haiti, in Jamaica, and finally, through the long fight for civil rights. Each struggle carried the same quiet heartbeat, the same rhythm that began at Stono. Freedom whispered through generations. Freedom written in the margins of history. Freedom, once a dream, now a memory that refuses to die. If you stand by the Stono River today, you might not see anything remarkable. Just calm water winding through fields and trees. But if you listen closely, you might hear something faint. A distant drum beat, a voice carried on the wind, calling out from 1739. It says, "Do not forget, do not mistake silence for peace, do not think that the story ended here." Because in every movement that followed, in every voice that rose against injustice, there was a trace of that September morning, a spark left behind by a man named Jemmy and the few who dared to follow him. Their march did not end at Stono. It continues in every story told, in every act of resistance, in every reminder that freedom, once imagined, can never be forgotten. In the early light of dawn, on a dirt road in South Carolina, a man stood up and chose to be free. And though the world tried to erase him, Jemmy's name remains, not written in marble, but in memory, whispered still, through the fields, through the wind, through the echoes of dread, a story of courage, of fire, and of freedom.